Tonight, we drift into a world born of gold and shadow, a realm where gods once wove the fabric of eternity, and where the sound of grace still trembles beneath the dust. In this dream, light does not fall from the heavens. It grows from the earth itself, rising through roots and soil until it blossoms into divinity. Yet even the brightest grace must one day fade, and when it did, the world broke. Thus began the age of fracture, the slow unraveling of a circle once perfect, and the birth of sorrow beneath a silent sky. The Erdtree still glows in memory, vast, golden, eternal. Its branches stretch toward the heavens, drinking from the wounds of the earth, its roots buried deep within the graves of gods and kings. It is a monument of light and memory, a divine heart beating at the center of the lands between. But as the ring shattered and the grace dimmed, even the Erdtree began to dream, a dream of what once was, and what might one day return. Those who walked this broken realm were neither dead nor living. They were tarnished, wanderers cast away from the light, called back by a whisper of gold that shimmered like remembrance. They carried blades dulled by time, hearts fractured by sin, yet still they moved toward the Erdtree's glow, seeking the promise of meaning in a world undone by gods. Before we begin, tell me, what game do you find yourself playing before sleep finds you? Write your answer in the comments below. I'd love to read what worlds call to you when the night grows still. And if you enjoy these quiet journeys through myth and memory, please take a moment to subscribe. It helps keep this sanctuary alive, a place where dreams and legends continue to breathe, long after their gods have fallen. In the beginning, there was order, a light without end, woven into gold, circling itself in perfect harmony. The Elden Ring pulsed at the heart of all things, a divine law that held the world together, sky to earth, flame to flesh, God to man. Its glow was not warmth but purpose. The lands between existed because it willed them to, and within that will, all life found meaning. The Erdtree towered above creation like a living sun, its roots entwined with the very bones of the world. Beneath its branches, time did not move forward but around, turning endlessly in the rhythm of grace. And then it broke. No one remembered the exact moment, only the silence that followed, a silence so deep it seemed the world itself had forgotten how to breathe. Some said it was the hand of Queen Marika, the goddess of life and law, who shattered the divine circle. Others whispered it was the will of something older, hidden beneath the golden light, a truth that had waited, patient and unseen, for the moment when eternity would falter. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. The circle fractured, the light dimmed, and the world began to bleed. The first sound after the shattering was not thunder, nor weeping. It was the sound of wind moving through hollow space. The stars themselves flickered, their reflection breaking across the waters of the lands between. The Erdtree's glow wavered, its branches trembling like a wounded beast. And where there had once been one will, one divine order, there were now countless fragments, each carrying a shard of power, each claiming truth. The gods felt it first. The divine were not made to question their own creation, yet as the ring broke, they felt doubt for the first time. It was a pain unlike any wound, a fracture within the soul. Their immortal hearts began to beat with something dangerously close to fear. The demigods, Marika's children, turned their eyes from the heavens to one another, seeing in each face not family, but rival claimants to what had been lost. The age of grace had ended. The age of fracture had begun. The world that followed was not one of chaos, but of quiet ruin, a beauty broken into pieces, each fragment shining faintly in the dust. The Golden Order lingered like an echo, fading across the lands. The sky still held light, but it was thin, trembling, stretched across wounds too vast to heal. The earth still bore fruit, but its sweetness was tinged with sorrow. Even the wind carried the sound of absence, the hum of something missing that could never be restored. Temples fell not to war, but to neglect. Statues of Marika and her kin leaned slowly into the soil, their once radiant faces consumed by moss. The rivers that once glowed with grace ran dark, carrying whispers of forgotten hymns. In the capital, where the Erdtree's roots wound deepest, the air shimmered with gold dust, the remnants of what had been divine. Those who breathed it lived longer, but their dreams were haunted by the light that no longer blessed them. Some still prayed to the fragments. They knelt before pieces of the ring as if before the gods themselves, believing that faith could mend what was broken. But no answer came. The grace that once flowed freely had grown thin and cruel, appearing only in glimmers, like tears caught in sunlight. For the first time in eternity, the divine had fallen silent. And in that silence, the world began to remember itself. The mortals, once sheltered beneath divine law, looked upon the fallen light and found within it something terrible and beautiful choice. No longer bound by the golden will, men and women began to shape their own fates, to fight and build and fall according to their desires. Without grace to guide them, they stumbled into darkness, and in that darkness, they began to dream. From these dreams rose empires and ruins, heroes and tyrants, each claiming their fragment of divinity. Wars were fought not for survival, but for the right to define what was true. The shards of the ring passed from hand to hand, kingdom to kingdom, god to god, until the land itself became a battlefield of memory. Queen Marika watched from the hollow throne, her face serene, her eyes distant. Some said she grieved the world's decay. Others believed she found peace in its imperfection. There were whispers that she had not destroyed the ring out of malice, but mercy, that she had seen eternity's flaw and broken it to let the world breathe. But even mercy, when given by gods, is cruel. Her children turned on one another, and in their hands, grace became a weapon. The sky above the Erdtree burned with gold and ash. The air shimmered as divine power cracked like glass. Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, vanished into exile, carrying with him the last memory of a world unbroken. His fall marked the beginning of the long silence, the time when gods hid their faces and the earth waited for new voices to rise. And yet, even in ruin, the Erdtree did not die. It stood still, glowing faintly, its roots pulsing with memory. Beneath its light, something stirred, not God, not man, but those who had been forgotten by both. The tarnished, souls cast out when grace was whole, now called back to a fractured world. They came from dust and exile, drawn by a voice only they could hear, faint, distant, but persistent, like the echo of a dream. They did not know why they had been called, only that they must answer. And so they walked, step by step, toward the tree that still glowed with divine memory, their eyes filled with the reflection of a light they no longer believed in. The shattering had scattered the world into fragments of truth. But within each fragment lay the possibility of rebirth, the promise that even broken circles might still remember how to turn. The gods had fallen silent, but the earth itself whispered of something new. The age of gold had ended. The age of men had not yet begun. And in the hollow between them, grace waited, not shining but sleeping. When the ring shattered, its fragments did not fall neatly into place. They scattered like starlight caught in a storm, some sinking deep into the roots of the world. Others carried far across the lands by the winds of destiny. Each piece still pulsed faintly with power, still remembered the shape of what it had once been, and in remembering, it longed to be whole again. Yet nothing divine is ever broken without consequence. The lands between began to change. The air shimmered with remnants of grace, not radiant but restless, as if searching for something it could no longer find. The golden light that once crowned the Erdtree now drifted like dust, gathering in strange places, ancient ruins, forgotten tombs, the hollows of mountains where old gods once dreamed. Where it touched life, it granted strength, but also madness. For the light without purpose is a dangerous thing. It burns those who reach for it without understanding. The first to seek the fragments were the demigods, Marika's children, born of divinity but cursed by inheritance. To them, the broken ring was not ruin, but opportunity. They saw in its pieces the chance to seize what their mother had withheld, the right to shape eternity in their own image. What followed was not merely war, but revelation, the moment when gods turned from the heavens and looked upon themselves. Godric the Grafted, in his hunger for greatness, began his descent into monstrosity. He gathered limbs from those he conquered, sewing them into his own flesh, believing that strength could be rebuilt from the bodies of others. His kingdom became a grotesque reflection of creation, a place where power was stolen, not earned. Radan, the Red Lion of War, sought the stars themselves. In his youth, he studied the gravity of the heavens, learning to command its pull. When the ring broke, he turned that power inward, holding the very cosmos in place, refusing to let the stars move until his mother's will returned. But even he, the greatest of generals, was devoured by his own purpose, a god who could not stop fighting, even when there were no enemies left. Melania, the blade of Mequella, carried rot like a crown. Her beauty was unmatched, her grace perfect, but within her bloomed a sickness that devoured everything it touched. She fought not for glory, but for her brother, whose purity was untouched by the war's corruption. And in her devotion, she became both saint and curse, the embodiment of love that destroys to preserve. And through it all, Queen Marika remained silent. Some said she had vanished into the Erdtree itself, becoming part of its light. Others believed she watched from beyond the veil, neither living nor dead, her eyes turned away from the world she had broken. Her absence became a wound upon the land, a silence that echoed louder than thunder. The mortals who lived beneath the gods endured the shattering in their own way. Cities crumbled, faith fractured. Temples once radiant with prayer now housed only echoes. The common folk turned their worship inward, not toward the Erdtree, but toward survival. The old songs became laments, the old blessings turned to curses whispered by firelight. Yet in that despair, something small and defiant began to bloom. Those who had been cast out long ago, the tarnished, felt a call. It was faint at first, like the shimmer of gold seen through fog. Then it grew, threading itself through their dreams. A voice spoke to them, not in words, but in feeling. It was grace, or what was left of it, reaching out through the fractures, seeking those who could carry its memory forward. The tarnished awoke from death and exile, each one burdened by the echo of a purpose they could not name. Some rose with hope, others with hunger. They wandered the lands between, their paths crossing and diverging like rivers splitting through the soil. They were warriors, scholars, thieves, and kings, remnants of a forgotten age, bound not by blood but by yearning. And always in the distance, the Erdtree glowed. It was dimmer now, but still majestic, a golden crown over a broken world. The tarnished could see its light through storm and ruin, through rot and snow. It became both promise and punishment, drawing them onward. They walked through the ruins of grace, through cities swallowed by moss and castles split by roots, their footsteps soft upon the ashes of gods. The demigods watched their approach. To them, the tarnished were intruders, reminders of the mortality they had tried to forget. They sent armies to destroy them, monsters to devour them, curses to bind them. Yet no blade, no spell, no rot could extinguish what the tarnished carried within, the quiet persistence of those who have already lost everything. Some said it was madness that drove them forward, others said it was faith. But beneath both, there was something deeper, the faint memory of light. Each tarnished carried a spark of what the gods had abandoned, the will to rise again. And in their struggle, the world began to turn once more. From the fragments of the ring came a strange kind of life, broken, imperfect, but alive. The ruins that once stood silent began to hum with faint energy. Rivers glowed faintly at night, carrying veins of gold through the dark earth. The dead stirred in their graves, not in rage, but in remembrance. Even the beasts of the land seemed to move differently, as if sensing the slow return of something ancient and vast. But the world was not healing. It was remembering. Each fragment of the ring, each spark of grace, carried within it not just power but story, the memory of a world that had once known balance. And as the tarnished gathered these pieces, unknowingly, they began to rewrite the pattern of eternity. Their choices, small as they seemed, rippled through the fabric of being, shaping the song that the gods had left unfinished. In time, the scholars of the Round Table would whisper of this age as the shattering, not merely an event, but a wound still open. They said that every fragment of the ring pulsed like a heartbeat, calling to the souls of men and gods alike. Some answered with greed, others with reverence. But all were drawn to the same truth. The circle had broken, yet it had not died. The world was fractured, yes, but within each fracture was reflection of what was, of what could be. And in the distance, beneath the glow of the Erdtree, the wind carried a whisper, faint, tender, endless. All that is broken remembers how to return. The shattering was not merely destruction. It was awakening. The gods had lost their throne, but the world had found its freedom. And beneath the golden dust, something new began to breathe. The Erdtree was the first light, not born from flame, but from memory. It rose from the depths of the world like a golden wound healed in glory, its roots threading through stone and time, its crown touching the edges of the firmament. In the earliest days, before the ring was even named, the Erdtree had already begun its quiet work, drinking from the waters beneath creation, breathing the will of gods into the soil. Its glow was the pulse of order itself, the sign that the world was not chaos, but harmony. Every leaf shimmered with the promise of eternity. Every root carried whispers of what was yet to come. It was said that the Erdtree was not merely a tree, but the body of the divine will, the vessel through which grace flowed into all living things. Its branches reached over kingdoms, over oceans, over the very borders of dream. Beneath its golden light, beasts grew gentle, men grew wise, and even death itself seemed a little slower to arrive. The air beneath its canopy shimmered faintly, alive with particles of grace that drifted like pollen, glowing in the sunlight and dissolving softly when touched. In those days, the lands between were whole. The light of the Erdtree crowned every dawn and blessed every dusk. It was said that to walk in its shadow was to be seen by the gods, to be remembered by creation itself. Farmers would raise their eyes to its glow before harvest. Warriors would whisper its name before battle. Even the dead were laid to rest facing its branches, believing that in time they would rise again within its light. But no light remains pure forever. When the Elden Ring was shattered, the Erdtree did not die, it endured, as all things divine must. Yet its endurance came with cost. The light that once flowed freely began to falter, dimming in places where it once shone brightest. Its branches turned heavy, its golden leaves hardening like metal in the cold wind. The grace that had once united the world began to turn inward, retreating into its roots. It was as if the tree mourned what the gods had done. And in that mourning, it began to change. The scholars of the Round Table once wrote that the Erdtree wept golden tears into the rivers, tears that hardened into sap and fell upon the earth like jewels. This sap was called amber, and it carried within it the echo of the Erdtree's sorrow. To drink of it was to taste the memory of divinity, sweet, radiant, but unbearably heavy. Some said it granted vision, others said madness. Perhaps they were the same thing. As the years passed, the golden light that had once covered the world began to gather only at the tree's roots. The lands between grew dim, yet the Erdtree itself remained unbroken, still reaching, still remembering. Even in the darkness of the shattering, it glowed, a single promise standing against oblivion. To the common folk, it became a symbol of hope. To the gods, it became a mirror, for though it still shone, its light no longer belonged to them. The Erdtree had grown beyond its keepers. Its roots spread too deep, touching realms no god could rule. It began to listen not to the heavens, but to the earth. Beneath its vast trunk, the dead whispered softly, their voices mingling with the pulse of its sap. The Erdtree heard them, and in its vast and wordless way, it began to dream. That dream was neither prophecy nor madness. It was remembrance. The Erdtree remembered every prayer ever spoken beneath its boughs, every tear, every offering. It remembered the sound of laughter before war, the scent of soil before blood, and within that endless remembering, it found grief. For even a god-born tree could not escape the weight of memory. Its golden light began to flicker, not from weakness, but from understanding. When Marika walked beneath its shadow, she alone could hear its song. Some say the Erdtree spoke to her, not in words, but in feeling. It told her that the circle she had created could not hold forever, that perfection was only another form of prison. And perhaps it was then, standing beneath that vast golden canopy, that she chose to break the ring. For to love the world was to let it fall, to give it back its freedom, even if it meant surrendering the divine order she had built. After the shattering, the Erdtree changed again. Its roots thickened, splitting mountains, drinking deep of what had once been buried. It drew from the rot, the ash, the forgotten, and in doing so, it absorbed their memory too. Grace became heavier, more mortal, more flawed. The light that had once purified now preserved, keeping the world in balance between life and decay. The tarnished, when they first returned, saw the Erdtree from afar and mistook its glow for the same grace that had cast them out. But what they saw was not the light of mercy, it was the light of endurance. The Erdtree no longer gave freely, it watched, it waited. Its radiance became a test, not a gift. Those who drew near found themselves judged not by gods, but by their own reflection within its glow. For the tree no longer answered prayers, it revealed them. Some among the tarnished tried to claim the tree's power, believing they could restore the world. Others saw in it only a monument to pride, a symbol of divine cruelty hidden beneath beauty. And so the wars began anew, fought not for kingdoms but for meanings. Each blade drawn was a question, each death a fragment of an answer. Still, the Erdtree endured. It shed its golden leaves into the wind, and each leaf carried a whisper of grace, falling softly upon fields of ruin. Those who caught one felt, for a moment, the warmth of what the world had been, and then the ache of what it had lost. Even now, when the light flickers across the horizon, the people of the lands between lift their eyes toward it, as if by looking they might remember how it felt to be whole, and perhaps they are right to look. For though the Erdtree no longer blesses as it once did, it still remembers. It still glows, not out of duty, but out of love, the quiet love of something that has seen all things fall and yet refuses to forget them. In the silence after the shattering, when the gods fled and the dead lingered, the Erdtree stood alone, the last witness of perfection, and the first mourner of its end. Its roots run deep into the heart of the world where light and darkness sleep entwined. Its branches rise high, reaching for a heaven that no longer answers, and between them, in the golden glow of dusk, the wind still hums the song of the beginning. The Erdtree is not what it was, it is what remains, and sometimes that is all eternity requires. When the world was young, the Erdtree's light was gentle. It did not command, it did not demand. It simply was, and in being it sustained all things. Its grace flowed like breath through the air, carried by wind and water, unseen but felt. In those early ages, even the gods themselves knelt in silence beneath its branches, for in the Erdtree's glow they saw their own beginnings. It was said that the tree's roots reached not only through the soil, but through memory itself, that it touched every life, every death, every thought that dared to dream of eternity. But after the ring broke, its light began to change. It no longer spread freely through the lands. It gathered, curling inward like a heart wounded. Where once the Erdtree's radiance had flowed in rivers of gold, it now fell in narrow streams, each one flickering like a candle in the dark. Those who followed these golden threads called them the grace, and through them, the world still whispered of divinity. Yet this new light was different. It chose its bearers, calling to some and passing over others, leaving behind a silence that felt like exile. The scholars called this the age of withering grace. The priests called it the trial of the faithful. But the people, those who toiled beneath the fading boughs, simply called it the waiting. For though the Erdtree still stood, its warmth no longer touched the hearts of men. Its glow, once soft and merciful, now seemed distant and cold, a reminder of what had been lost. In the shadow of this waiting, new forms of faith were born. Some turned their prayers to the golden sap that bled from the Erdtree's bark, believing that in its tears the old light still lived. They gathered it in bowls of stone and drank, seeking visions of the divine. Others built shrines to its fallen leaves, treating them as relics, whispering blessings to the wind. But there were also those who turned away entirely, who looked upon the golden glow and saw not grace, but imprisonment, a light that blinded as much as it guided. Among these voices rose the philosophers of the fracture. They taught that the Erdtree's grace was not salvation, but memory, that it bound the world to what once was and refused to let it move forward. To them, true freedom lay not in light, but in shadow. They wandered the lands between seeking the dark places where grace could not reach, believing that in darkness the soul might finally belong to itself. Yet even they could not deny the beauty of the tree. On nights when the clouds parted and the moon cast its pale glow across the golden branches, even the faithless would fall silent. The Erdtree was not only light, it was memory made visible, the proof that once the world had been whole. And though the gods who ruled it had fallen, their dreams still lingered in the shimmering air, fragile and eternal. Queen Marika had once said that the Erdtree was the cradle of grace and the cage of will. She had spoken these words not as prophecy, but as lament. For she understood that the same roots that gave life also held it in place, and that the same light that revealed truth could blind those who stared too long. To her, the Erdtree was both creation and burden, the symbol of divine perfection and the weight of divine control. After she vanished into silence, her words remained. They were carved into the stones of the capital, whispered by wandering monks, and sung by those who still believed the goddess would return. Each interpretation changed with time, but the meaning endured. The Erdtree was alive, and in its life lay both grace and grief. The tarnished who rose in those years felt this truth deeply. They were drawn to the Erdtree not merely by faith, but by instinct. To look upon its glow was to remember something half forgotten, a warmth that once belonged to them, a promise they had failed to keep. When they followed the streams of golden light across the lands between, they did not walk toward salvation. They walked toward memory. Each tarnished carried within them a flicker of the old grace, a remnant of the time when the world still sang in harmony with the divine. Some mistook that spark for destiny, others saw it as curse. But all were bound by it, as if the Erdtree's roots reached through the soil and wrapped around their hearts. They dreamed of the tree's light, even when they had never seen it. They bled gold when struck, as though the memory of grace still pulsed within their veins. There were moments, fleeting and rare, when the Erdtree's light would break through the clouds and touch the ground directly. In those moments, the grass would shimmer like glass, and the air would grow thick with the hum of the divine. Birds would fall silent, rivers would still, and all who stood beneath that radiance would feel, for a single breath, the weight of eternity pressing gently against their souls. But just as quickly, it would fade. The light would recede into the tree's heart, leaving behind only the wind and the ache of remembrance. The tarnished would look to the sky and wonder whether grace was guiding them forward or pulling them back into the past. And still, they walked. For the Erdtree was not merely an object of worship, it was a promise. Its light whispered that even in ruin, order could be restored, that even broken things could be made whole again. Yet it also reminded the world that perfection was a burden too great to bear. Every step toward the tree was a step toward understanding this paradox, that grace was both gift and chain, and that to be blessed by it was to be bound by it. In time, those who studied the Erdtree's nature began to speak of two kinds of grace: the outer grace, which flowed from its branches, visible and golden, and the hidden grace, which slept deep within its roots, dark and unbound. The outer grace was law, shining, unwavering. The hidden grace was truth, quiet, flawed, alive. The gods had built their thrones upon the outer light, but it was the hidden glow beneath the soil that kept the world from forgetting itself. And so, as the ages turned and the lands between drifted deeper into twilight, the Erdtree stood between both lights, its crown burning with divinity, its roots heavy with sorrow. The world worshipped what it could see and feared what it could not. Yet beneath it all, the Erdtree endured as it always had. It remembered. It grew. Its light reached through ruin and frost and death, searching for the heart still willing to listen. For grace is not a law written by gods. It is a song whispered by the earth, carried upward through root and leaf, through wind and time, until even the stars fall silent to hear it. And if one stands quietly enough beneath its boughs, when the world has gone still and the night is long, one might hear it still, the faint hum of life remembering itself, the promise that even in fracture, light can return. The Erdtree remains, and in its glow, eternity breathes once more. She was born of light, not the gentle kind that warms, but the sharp brilliance that blinds. Queen Marika the Eternal, mother of the demigods, keeper of the ring, and shaper of the world's first law. In her presence, the Erdtree glowed brighter, its roots humming with divine order. Her voice was said to be calm as water and her gaze heavy as judgment. Yet beneath that calm lay a mind ever questioning, a heart that felt the weight of eternity pressing too tightly upon the world it governed. In the beginning, she ruled as both God and guardian. The Elden Ring pulsed within her, not as ornament but as organ, the living law that bound existence to order. Her will was the will of the greater, and through her, grace flowed unbroken. She made the lands between into paradise, or so the chronicles claimed. Death was banished, harmony enshrined, and the Erdtree's golden shadow stretched across every realm. To live beneath, it was to live beneath her word. But even gods dream, and even eternal hearts can grow weary. Marika began to see the cracks within the perfection she had built. She saw mortals kneel not from devotion, but from fear. She saw her own children, the demigods, born of divinity and ambition, looking upon her throne not as inheritance, but as prison. And in their eyes, she saw what the greater will could not, that eternity without choice is only another kind of death. The gods of old whispered that Marika's sorrow began when she tore away the rune of death, sealing it within the black blades of the assassins. In doing so, she thought she had preserved her creation, but the act left a wound within the world, for by denying death, she denied renewal. Life no longer flowed in rhythm, only in stillness. Souls lingered, bound to the golden light, unable to return to the dark from which they came. In her desire to make the world eternal, Marika had made it hollow, and so she began to question. The first to sense her unrest was Godfrey, her consort and first Elden Lord. He was a warrior of impossible strength, forged in battles that shaped the dawn of the world. To him, glory was purpose and war was worship. But when the Erdtree's order rendered war meaningless, when victory could no longer die, his spirit faltered. Marika, seeing this, loved him all the more, for in his sorrow she saw her own reflection. It is said that on the day she exiled Godfrey, the Erdtree dimmed, not in anger, but in mourning. She sent him away with words that the ages remember. Thou art divest of grace. Go now, tarnished, to know what is to be mortal. In sending him away, she cast the first shadow upon her own divinity. For she too longed to know what it meant to be free of grace, to feel the world not as God, but as woman. Her children did not understand. Godwyn, her golden son, was the most beloved. His light shone brightest, his heart the most pure. When he fell, slain by the Black Knives in the first death since the world's creation, something broke within Marika that could never be mended. She had banished death to protect her order, and now death had returned to claim what she loved most. The gods whispered that she wept, that her tears turned the rivers gold, and that for 3 days the Erdtree fell silent. When she rose again, she was changed. She took up the hammer of her will and struck the Elden Ring. The sound echoed across the heavens, a sound not of defiance, but of grief. The divine circle fractured, and through its cracks poured the truth of her heart, that even perfection must end, that even law must break to allow the world to live. The demigods scattered like stars cast from the sky. Each took a shard of her broken ring, and with it, a fragment of her dream. Some sought to rebuild it, others sought to rule in its absence. The lands between burned with the wars of her children, and Marika withdrew into silence, her divine form fading into myth. Melania and Mequella, twins of grace and rot, bore her sorrow in different ways. Mequella sought to heal what his mother had broken, weaving dreams of an untainted order. Melania, born of his light yet cursed by her own decay, carried the burden of love that destroys itself to protect. Morgoth, the veiled king, ruled the capital in loyalty, even as he was shunned for the omen horns upon his brow. He was a curse made flesh, faithful and unwanted, bound to a throne that no longer heard him. Mohg, his brother, embraced the darkness that Marika had denied. He built altars in the deep places, offering blood to forgotten gods, seeking power in the rot beneath the roots. And Radagon, her other self, her reflection and consort, took up her role when she vanished, standing before the broken ring as if to hold it together with his bare hands. Some say he loved her, others that he was her. In truth, they were one and the same, the twin halves of the divine will, forever divided by their own creation. The Erdtree, bound to her soul, felt her fracture. Its roots trembled, its light wavered. Golden leaves turned pale at the edges. Yet even in its grief, it continued to grow. For just as Marika's will had shattered the ring, her memory became its echo. The tree remembered her not as goddess, but as question, the question the world could not stop asking. Can divinity forgive itself? The demigods fought, but none could answer. They tore the lands between apart in their search for meaning, and still the Erdtree glowed, its light falling gently upon the ruins. Beneath that light, mortals began to whisper new prayers, not to Marika, nor to her children, but to the silence she had left behind. They prayed for freedom, for death, for rest. They prayed for something beyond grace, and perhaps in some distant way she heard them. For though her body was bound within the tree, her will lingered in the wind. It moved through the grass, through the whispers of leaves, through the faint shimmer of gold that drifted over the fields. Those who listened closely said they could hear her voice, soft, sorrowful, eternal, speaking not as a god, but as a mother. "I gave them eternity," she said, "and they forgot how to live." The Erdtree wept that night. Its light dimmed until the stars outshone it, and for the first time since the dawn of creation, the lands between slept in darkness. Yet in that darkness, a new light began to stir. It was not golden, it was not divine. It was the pale shimmer of mortal hope, fragile, uncertain, but alive. Marika's reign had ended, but her question remained. The gods had fallen silent, but the world had begun to speak. The wars of the demigods were not born in an instant. They began as whispers, pride clothed as duty, envy veiled as faith. The shattering of the Elden Ring had left each of Marika's children with a fragment of the divine, a reflection of her power twisted by desire. What had once bound them in golden unity now divided them into countless truths, each claiming to be the rightful echo of eternity. And so the heavens, which had once known peace beneath her gaze, turned upon themselves. From the Erdtree's roots to the edges of the sea, the lands between became a living battlefield. The golden boughs that once showered grace upon the world now shed light upon ruin. The sky itself seemed to fracture, gold breaking into crimson, and beneath it, gods bled like mortals. At the heart of this conflict stood Radagon, Marika's reflection, her other self. His war was not one of conquest, but of contradiction. He carried both reverence and regret, fighting to preserve what his soul longed to undo. In him, the greater will soar devotion. In him, Marika saw a mirror of her mistake. He gathered the loyal to his banner, forging alliances among the faithful who still clung to the dream of the Golden Order. Yet even he could not deny the quiet question burning within his heart. If perfection demands obedience, can love ever dwell within it, across the sea? Renala of the full moon raised her gaze to the stars and wept for what the earth had become. Once the queen of glimmering intellect, she had sought harmony between the cosmic and the divine. But when Radagon, her beloved, was taken by Marika's will, she withdrew to her academy and drowned her sorrow in sorcery. Her students whispered that she no longer slept, that she wandered the great halls at night speaking to her reflection in pools of starlight. And when her grief grew too great, she found solace in the dream, a world where her children still lived, where her love had not been stolen. Their offspring, the demigods of moonlight and gold, carried their mother's brilliance and their father's burden. Some sought peace, others sought to outshine the stars. Yet even they were caught in the slow unraveling of grace, drawn toward the same truth that had undone their mother, that divinity without compassion turns even gods to dust. In the east, the twin blades of war and rot carved their path through the world. Melania and Mequella, bound by devotion deeper than blood, carried within them both the flaw and the hope of their mother's design. Mequella, pure and kind, dreamed of a new order free from the will of the greater. He built the Erdtree, a sanctuary of rebirth where grace could grow untamed, wild as love itself. But in nurturing that dream, he fell into slumber, his body sealed within his own creation. Melania, left to guard him, became the sword of his dream. She was beautiful, terrible, radiant in decay. The scarlet rot flowed through her veins, a curse and a crown, devouring all it touched, yet never dimming her light. She waged endless war not for conquest, but for devotion, for her brother who slept, for the dream that might never wake. Those who faced her saw not a goddess, but a storm, graceful, deadly, eternal. In the west, Godric the Grafted sought to fill his weakness with others' strength. He tore limbs from heroes, wings from dragons, hearts from beasts, stitching them to his own flesh until his body became a grotesque hymn to ambition. He called it ascension, but the people called it blasphemy. His halls stank of blood and rot, and his laughter echoed through the ruined keeps like a hymn gone mad. Yet even he believed he served grace, that by consuming strength, he honored the divine will that had forsaken him. Far to the south, Morgoth, the veiled king, sat upon the decaying throne of Leyndell. Cursed by omen horns, shunned by those born of his own blood, he ruled not with pride but with duty. He saw himself as the last protector of his mother's dream, and even as the world turned against him, he refused to abandon it. Beneath his crown of ash, his heart burned with faith so pure it became his prison. To him, loyalty was holiness, and love was sacrifice. He ruled a city of ghosts, defending a dream already dead. His brother, Mohg, rejected that dream entirely. Cast into the depths, he found new gods among the blood, ancient and formless, whispering promises older than grace. He drank of their power, his body twisting into something neither divine nor mortal. He built his empire in the dark, painting the walls with devotion and blood, calling it love. He sought to rise not as heir but as liberator, believing that in breaking the old order, he could free even the gods from themselves. Above them all, the Erdtree stood in silence. Its branches stretched wide across the sky, but its light no longer reached the ground. The wars of Marika's children burned beneath it like fever, yet the tree did not move. Its golden glow had become cold, its shadow indifferent. Some said it grieved, others said it waited. Perhaps it simply remembered, and in the cracks between these wars, mortals moved like shadows. The tarnished wandered the ruins, scavenging weapons from the corpses of gods, forging legends in the echoes of divinity. They spoke in whispers of a figure who would rise to claim the broken crown, not a god, but something new. They did not know whether to fear or to hope. The world trembled under the weight of its own memory. The stars fell silent, the sea turned still. The demigods' wars had reshaped the lands so completely that even time seemed to forget how to flow. Each battle, each death, was another note in the song of Marika's undoing, a melody of longing and ruin echoing through the roots of the Erdtree. And though none could hear it, deep beneath the golden soil, she still spoke. "I tore eternity apart so they might be free," she whispered. But freedom, too, has its chains. Her voice drifted upward through root and leaf, through blood and bone, touching the hearts of her children like a forgotten lullaby. Some turned away from it, some wept. Others fought harder, mistaking its sorrow for command. And so the wars continued, endless, radiant, and tragic. For what are gods, if not mortals who have forgotten how to die? The lands between glowed faintly beneath the shadow of their struggle, and in that faint light, grace flickered like breath, not gone, not pure, but enduring. And above it all, the Erdtree watched, eternal and unmoving, as the world it once blessed learned to live without it. They rose from dust and silence. Not gods, not men, but something between. The tarnished, those once touched by grace and later cast aside, awoke to the whisper of a light they could no longer see. It came to them in dreams, soft and distant, like the sound of wind moving through an old chapel. The voice spoke without words, calling them home to the lands between, the realm they had lost, and the purpose that had been buried with it. They did not awaken all at once. Some stirred from graves, their bones wrapped in soil and roots. Others rose from far-off kingdoms, the golden gleam of the Erdtree faint upon the horizon. Each one bore the mark of exile, a faint scar beneath the skin, the memory of light denied. Yet in that emptiness, something stronger remained, the will to move, to reach, to return. The call of grace did not come as revelation. It came as ache. It lingered in the heart like longing, drawing them onward with a promise too quiet to name. And so, the tarnished walked. They crossed deserts where the sun burned pale, forests where no birds sang, ruins where gods had turned to stone. They carried weapons older than their own memories, each one forged in an age when faith still had shape. Their armor was rusted, their steps unsteady, yet with every mile they began to remember. The lands between awaited them, though not as they had left it. The cities of gold were now cities of ash. The roads were haunted by those who had once served gods and now served only hunger. The air itself shimmered faintly with the remnants of grace, visible only to those who had once been blessed by it. To the tarnished, the light flickered in the corner of their sight, a trail of faint golden motes that led them ever closer to the Erdtree. Some followed in silence, believing that obedience would restore what was lost. Others doubted. "Why call us back now?" they asked the empty sky. "Why grant grace only after casting us away?" No answer came, only the hum of wind through the distant branches, like the echo of a god's breath that had forgotten its own name. Among them walked those whose purpose was stronger than faith. One carried the blade of an old lord, its edge dulled by regret. Another wore the crest of a forgotten order, still praying to a name erased from history. One carried no weapon at all, only a memory of flame. They were not heroes, not chosen. They were remnants, and yet they were the only ones who still moved when all else stood still. They gathered in strange places, by the crumbling walls of Stormvale, by the dying roots of the minor Erdtrees, by the quiet waters of Liurnia. There they spoke in low tones of what they had seen. Some had glimpsed visions in their sleep, the Erdtree burning, the sky bleeding gold, a hand reaching through light. Others had heard voices, fragments of the greater will, perhaps, or of something older, but most simply followed the glow. It led them forward like the memory of a promise they could no longer recall. Not all who followed the grace found solace. Some fell to madness, chasing illusions of power, mistaking the call for command. Others grew hollow, wandering without direction, their eyes empty but their feet still moving. Yet even in their ruin, the light did not leave them. For grace, once given, cannot be unmade, it can only fade, waiting to be remembered. In time, the tarnished came to understand that the call of grace was not a summons, but a question. It did not order them to act, it invited them to choose. Would they rebuild what had been lost, or bury it forever? Would they seek to restore the golden law, or to forge something new from its ashes? Each step toward the Erdtree was a step toward an answer, and the tree, towering above all, seemed to watch. Its light still burned, but faintly, not the blinding gold of old, but a gentle radiance, as if testing those who approached. The tarnished could feel it in their bones, a warmth that deepened with each act of courage, each moment of mercy. Yet it could vanish just as quickly, replaced by cold emptiness when cruelty or pride took hold. Grace was alive, and it remembered. Some tarnished found companionship upon the long road. There was Melina, a figure of soft flame and patient sorrow, who offered guidance where the gods would not. She spoke little of herself, yet her eyes carried centuries of knowing. To those she chose, she became a spark, a living piece of grace-given form. With her, they journeyed not only through the land, but through themselves. Others walked alone, their faith unbound by name or god. Some sought to claim the title of Elden Lord, believing that by doing so they could mend the broken order. Others sought only understanding, to see the truth of the world without the veil of divinity. A few sought vengeance, their hearts still scarred by what the gods had taken from them. Yet all were drawn by the same light, and all found themselves standing one day beneath the Erdtree's shadow. It was there, at the roots of the divine, that many learned the truth. The Erdtree would not let them enter. Its doors were sealed, its branches closed. Its light, which had once welcomed all life, now refused to touch them. Grace had called them home, only to stand between them and the heaven they sought. Some cursed the gods for cruelty. Others saw wisdom in the denial. For perhaps the Erdtree was not guarding itself, but guarding them, protecting the world from another cycle of divine perfection. Perhaps Marika's final will still lingered within its bark, whispering through the golden sap. They must find their own light. The tarnished did not turn back. Even denied entry, they did not yield. They camped beneath the tree, their fires flickering like stars fallen to the earth. Each flame told a story of loss, of hope, of defiance. The call of grace was no longer a whisper. It was the sound of countless hearts remembering what it meant to rise. They had no throne, no crown, no command from the heavens, but they had something greater, the quiet, human will to begin again. For in the end, the gods had created order, but only the tarnished would create meaning. And in the cold wind beneath the golden branches, the Erdtree trembled, as if, for the first time in ages, it had learned something new. They had come from every corner of the forgotten world, from broken kingdoms where the sea had swallowed the walls, from deserts where the bones of dragons gleamed beneath the sand, from ruins where golden statues of gods wept dust. They were the tarnished, the once blessed, the never forgiven. Their eyes still carried the faint shimmer of grace, but their hearts were scarred with the memory of exile. The call had drawn them back to the lands between, to the shadow of the Erdtree, where the air still hummed faintly with the promise of divinity. Yet what they found was not the paradise of memory, but a kingdom of echoes. The Erdtree's light no longer bathed the world in gold. It flickered through the fog like an old flame clinging to life, illuminating ruins that had forgotten their names. Cities that had once rung with the songs of faith now slept beneath vines and ash. The wind carried whispers, fragments of hymns that broke into silence before the final word. To walk through such a world was to walk through the ribs of a dead god. Still, the tarnished walked. They did not move as conquerors or pilgrims, but as seekers. The call of grace was no command. It was a feeling, the faint tug of something remembered but not understood. Each tarnished carried it differently. To one, it was the ache of guilt. To another, the hunger for redemption. And to others still, it was curiosity, the simple, unkillable desire to know. The road was endless. The lands between did not flow in straight lines but spiraled, folding upon themselves like the rings of an ancient tree. Mountains circled back to valleys. Rivers disappeared into mist only to emerge miles away beneath the same stars. It was as though the world itself resisted them, or tested them. In Liurnia, they found the remnants of Renala's academy, its towers half buried in fog and memory. There, they met sorcerers who had long since forgotten the world of flesh, their bodies thin as candlelight. They spoke in riddles of the moon's reflection upon water, how it could be seen but never held. The moon remembers what the Erdtree has forgotten, one murmured before vanishing into mist. Farther north, through the frozen paths of the mountaintops, they found ancient giants frozen mid-step, their hearts still glowing faintly through their chests. The air there was alive with thunder that never struck. Among the ruins, a tarnished discovered runes carved in ice, words written by those who had defied the gods before. Fire is not destruction, it is the memory of beginning. Each encounter left a mark upon them, each fragment a lesson carved into their souls. The tarnished learned not only the paths of stone and snow, but the quiet geometry of grace, how it curved and coiled through the world like a serpent, how it revealed itself not in glory, but in endurance. For grace was not the blazing light of victory. It was the small, stubborn glow that refused to die. But the road grew darker. As they drew nearer to the Erdtree, the world itself began to resist. The ground cracked beneath their feet, breathing ash. The skies bled gold and crimson. In the shadows of the great roots, they met those who had once been tarnished too, but who had turned away from grace, consumed by hunger for its memory. Their eyes glowed with a light too fierce, their bodies reshaped by the shards of divinity they had devoured. They spoke in tongues that twisted like flame. "You seek grace," they whispered, "but grace seeks to bind." The tarnished fought them, not in hatred but in sorrow. Each fallen foe reflected what they might have become, not monsters, but dreamers who had looked too deeply into the light. And still, the Erdtree stood untouched. Its roots spread like veins across the earth, curling around ruins, piercing mountains, drinking deeply of all that lived and died. To some, the roots sang, to others they screamed. Beneath them, the air was heavy, filled with the scent of sap and centuries. The tarnished could feel the hum of the world through the soles of their feet. It was as though they were walking upon the skin of something still alive. There were moments of grace, quiet, unspoken things that the gods had never known. A tarnished knelt beside a dying beast and laid a hand upon its fur, feeling the last tremor of life pass into stillness. Another found a ruined chapel where candles still burned without flame, their light soft as breath. And one, standing upon the cliff's edge beneath the Erdtree's golden shadow, whispered to no one. Perhaps the gods were only the first to forget how to listen. That night, the grace returned, faint, fluttering, like the memory of a dream. It flowed through the tarnished, through their scars and weary hearts, not as command, but as understanding. For the first time, they saw what Marika had seen beneath the golden canopy, that the circle had never been meant to remain unbroken. That the shattering was not the end of grace, but its renewal, its return to those who could carry it with humility. The Erdtree glowed faintly then, its light falling in soft waves across the sleeping camp. Some said they heard a voice, not thunder, but a whisper moving through the leaves. Grace does not choose, it remembers. They awoke the next morning with the dawn. The mist had lifted. The path toward the tree was clearer than before, though no less perilous. They walked as if drawn by the quiet certainty that awaited them, not salvation, not triumph, but truth. When they reached the foot of the Erdtree, they saw it up close for the first time, vast beyond comprehension, its trunk wider than cities, its bark shimmering with runes of gold. Light pulsed within it like breath. The tarnished fell to their knees, not in worship but in awe. This was not a god, it was the memory of one. It was the body of a dream that had outlived its dreamers. They waited for the doors to open. They did not. The Erdtree stood silent, its glow indifferent, as if measuring them. The tarnished looked to one another, their faces marked by time and longing. Then, without a word, they rose. They began to climb. Through roots and ash, through branches older than history, they ascended toward the crown of the world. The wind grew thin. The air shimmered with gold and shadow. And though their limbs trembled, though their strength waned, they continued. Not because grace pulled them, but because will push them. At the summit, where the world met the heavens, they saw what the gods had hidden, that grace had never truly fallen from them. It had simply waited, for hearts strong enough to hold its weight. The light did not descend. It bloomed within, and for the first time since the shattering, the Erdtree seemed to breathe, its branches swaying not in wind, but in acknowledgement. The tarnished stood in silence, their faces washed in soft gold. They did not speak. They did not kneel. They simply understood. The gods had created grace to command. Marika had broken it to free. The tarnished had carried it to remember. And now, the world, fractured, scarred, and alive, began to turn again. The call of grace faded, not because it had ended, but because it no longer needed to speak. The tarnished had found what all gods forget, that divinity is not in the heavens, but in the hearts that refuse to stop walking. As the sun set behind the Erdtree, the wind carried a new sound, not hymns of worship, but of quiet breathing, the rhythm of life continuing. The light of grace flickered across the horizon, no longer bound to branches or thrones. It moved through rivers, through leaves, through the eyes of those who had once been forsaken. And so the world remembered its name again, not the name of gods nor of kings, but of those who walked, who fell, who rose, the tarnished, the bearers of forgotten light. The lands between were never meant to sleep. They were built upon the rhythm of grace, a harmony between sky and soil, god and mortal, order and decay. When the ring was whole, that rhythm held all things in place. The wind moved through fields of gold-like music, rivers shimmered with reflected light, the very air carried the breath of the divine. But when the circle broke, the song faltered. The land did not die, it remembered, and in that memory it began to dream. To walk through the lands between after the shattering was to wander through the fragments of that dream. The world seemed both alive and dead, breathing yet still. Mountains bled gold beneath the snow. Forests whispered in forgotten tongues. The ruins of ancient temples lay buried beneath moss, their columns cracked open like the ribs of sleeping giants. At night, the horizon glowed faintly with the distant shimmer of the Erdtree, as if the world itself were trying to recall the shape of light. The tarnished who roamed this realm came to understand something the gods had forgotten, that the land was not merely the stage for divinity, it was part of it. Every stone, every leaf, every gust of wind carried within it a trace of the old grace. Even in ruin, the world refused to let go of the order that had once bound it. In the heart of Limgrave, the plains stretched like a memory of creation. The grass glimmered faintly at dawn, each blade catching the light of a sun that seemed older than time. Ruined towers stood like monuments to vanished kings, their banners long since turned to dust. The soldiers who patrolled these lands did so not out of loyalty but out of habit, puppets of fading purpose, still defending thrones that no longer existed. And in the shadow of Stormvale Castle, the wind carried the scent of iron and rot. The great keep rose from the cliffs like a wound, its walls breathing mist. Within its halls wandered knights whose bodies had outlasted their souls, bound to the memory of their oaths. The echoes of their steps rang like distant thunder, repeating the rhythm of battles that ended centuries ago. To the north lay Liurnia of the Lakes, a land of mists and mirrors. The water stretched endlessly, calm as glass, reflecting the faint light of the moon. The ruins of the academy floated upon its surface, their towers rising like spires of thought. There, magic had once been worshipped as knowledge, and knowledge in turn as grace. But now the halls were hollow, their scholars turned to spirits, their books to ash. The moon above watched still, cold and silent, its reflection rippling through the water like the heartbeat of a god who refused to wake. Beyond the mist, the Erdtree's light flickered through the clouds, a distant crown of gold over the broken lands. Travelers spoke of how its glow changed with distance, gentle and warm from afar, sharp and blinding up close, as though it knew when it was being watched. Even the beasts of the field seemed to bow toward it when the wind shifted. To the east, the Kaled wastes burned with sickness. The sky there was red as rust, the earth twisted by rot. Trees grew sideways, their branches clutching at the air. Rivers ran thick as blood, and the ground itself pulsed faintly as though alive. No grace shone there, only decay, the shadow of creation feeding upon itself. Yet even in this place of horror, the land whispered. Beneath the rot, there was still order, struggling to remember its form. Some tarnished claimed they could hear the world speak. In the rustling of leaves, they heard prayers. In the crack of thunder, warnings. And in the stillness of dawn, they felt the faint hum of something vast and sorrowful watching them from beneath the soil. "The land dreams," one said, standing upon the ruins of a forgotten chapel. "And we are the dreams it has not yet forgotten." They began to see signs of the old world everywhere, not just in relics, but in the way the land breathed. The ruins were not dead stone, but half-living memory. The grass grew greener near sites where grace once flowed. The rivers curved around fallen temples as if unwilling to wash them away. Even the creatures that roamed the plains seemed changed by remembrance. Wolves that howled in unison at the golden light, birds that sang hymns no mortal had ever taught them. The tarnished realized that they were not merely walking upon the lands between, they were walking within it. The world itself was alive, pulsing faintly beneath their feet, dreaming through them. Every step stirred echoes of the past. Every battle awoke the sleeping dust of forgotten ages. And sometimes, when the wind grew still, they would see visions, faint and trembling, as if the land were showing them what it remembered. A king kneeling before the Erdtree, crown in hand. A goddess whispering into the roots. 1,000 golden leaves falling like rain upon the dead. These were not hauntings, but memories, the earth's way of keeping its promises. In the ruins of Lanedell, the once golden capital, those visions grew strongest. The streets were paved in veins of faintly glowing stone, the remnants of grace carved into the city's bones. Great statues of Marika and Radagon still stood, though their faces were cracked and their hands worn smooth by centuries of wind. Beneath the city, rivers of molten gold flowed through hidden channels, humming with the pulse of the Erdtree's roots. To stand there was to stand at the edge of divinity and decay, to feel both creation and ruin breathing as one. But the tarnished also saw the scars. Entire districts swallowed by roots that had grown wild and unbound. Bridges collapsed into chasms that glowed with faint light. The city was alive, but it was no longer listening. Its song had become discord, beautiful but broken. One of the tarnished, standing before the great gates, whispered what many felt. The gods did not abandon the world abandoned them. The lands between had grown beyond its keepers. It had taken their laws, their light, their sorrow, and turned them into soil. The grace that once descended from the heavens now rose from the earth itself, faint but steady, like sap through the veins of a tree. The cycle of power had reversed. The divine no longer shaped the land shaped what little divinity remained. And yet, for all its beauty, the world was lonely. Every ruin, every shadow, every gust of wind seemed to carry a question. Who will remember us? The tarnished in their wandering became the answer. Their footsteps wrote new hymns into the soil. Their battles carved new runes into the air. Through their will, the lands between began to awaken again, not into perfection, but into balance. For the first time since the shattering, the world began to breathe in harmony with those who walked upon it. The tarnished became the pulse, the rhythm, the reminder that life, no matter how fractured, endures. And high above, the Erdtree swayed in the wind, its golden leaves whispering softly across the land. The sound was neither mourning nor blessing. It was something older. It was the sound of the world remembering its own name. The lands between, neither godly nor mortal, neither living nor dead, had become something new. A place of echoes, of beginnings, of endless return. And in its vast and quiet heart, the faint hum of grace stirred once more, not as law, not as command, but as promise. Beneath the Erdtree's shadow, the lands between deepened into mystery. It was said that the world's roots did not end in soil, but stretched down through the ages themselves, binding every era, every ruin, every forgotten name into one vast memory. To the eye, the realm seemed still. Endless plains, quiet ruins, rivers winding through gold-lit fog. But to those who listened, truly listened, the land spoke. It spoke in the groan of roots shifting beneath the surface, in the sigh of wind through hollow towers, in the faint pulse of light that rose through the cracks of old stone. The tarnished who came here were no longer wanderers. They had crossed the outer kingdoms and returned to the heart of the world, where history had folded upon itself like the rings of an ancient tree. Here, every path led downward, not into darkness, but into remembrance. For the lands between was not simply a place. It was the echo of all places, the dream of the world remembering itself. At the base of the great Erdtree, where its roots vanished into the earth, they found caverns that breathed faint light. The air shimmered with golden dust, thick and warm as breath. The walls pulsed faintly, alive with veins of sap that glowed through the stone like trapped starlight. To stand there was to feel the heartbeat of creation itself, slow, patient, endless. And yet, within that divine rhythm, there was sorrow. The tarnished could feel it in the ground, a grief older than God's. It was as though the world still mourned the breaking of the ring, the silence of its maker, the wars that had turned grace into blood. The roots whispered names, Marika, Radagon, Godwyn, Melania, not as praise, but as memory. The land did not worship them. It remembered them with the same weary tenderness with which one remembers a scar. Some of the tarnished fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the feeling that filled the air. One wept, not from despair, but from awe. "It is alive," he murmured, touching the glowing roots. "It has always been alive." Others pressed deeper into the caverns, where the golden light faded to pale blue. There the air grew cold, and the stone gave way to water, still and dark, reflecting the faint shimmer above. In its surface they saw visions, cities before the fall, gods before their sorrow, the first dawn of grace. The reflections wavered like ghosts. When touched, they vanished, leaving ripples that glowed briefly, then dimmed into silence. Those who studied the runes carved into the cavern walls found words in a tongue older than the Erdtree itself. The script told of a time when the land was formless, when the greater will first sent its light from beyond the stars. It spoke of how the light did not conquer the darkness, but entered it. How from their union the Erdtree was born, not as victory, but as balance. The light gave order, the dark gave meaning. Both were needed for the world to breathe, but when the gods rose, they forgot this truth. They took the light and named it grace, and they cast away the shadow that had once been its reflection. And so, the lands between began to fracture, not because of rebellion, but because of forgetting. The world could not live on light alone. As the tarnished read the runes and listened to the murmurs of the deep, understanding came to them slowly, like dawn rising over a grave. The shattering had not been the world's first wound. It was merely the most recent. Before the Erdtree, before Marika, before grace itself, there had been other orders, other ages, each born from the ashes of the last. The land had seen gods rise and fall like the tides, each believing they were eternal. And every time, the soil had drunk their gold, their fire, their blood, and endured. They began to see the world not as broken, but as breathing, inhaling, and exhaling across centuries. The Erdtree was not the beginning, nor would it be the end. It was one voice in a greater song, a golden note in the endless symphony of creation. In the far south, where the roots stretched toward the sea, they found the remains of the first Erdtree, older, smaller, half-turned to stone. Its branches had petrified into arches of white, its trunk hollowed by time. Yet within it still flickered a faint glow, soft as memory. It was said that Marika had come here once, long before she bore the ring, and that she had knelt before this tree. She had not prayed, she had listened. And in that silence, the tree had shown her what no god wishes to see, the end of divinity and the peace that follows. Now, centuries later, the tarnished knelt in the same place. The faint light of the dead tree brushed their faces, and for a moment they felt something pass through them, not command, not prophecy, but understanding. That grace had never belonged to gods. It was older than them, older even than the Erdtree. It was the will of the world itself, to grow, to fall, to grow again. The land trembled then, not in violence, but in awakening. The roots pulsed brighter, and across the realm the Erdtree's light flickered as if answering. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of earth after rain, the smell of beginnings. In the ruined plains of Caelid, rot began to recede, patches of green pushing through the red soil. In Liurnia, the still waters rippled, faint rings of gold spreading from the moon's reflection. Even in the depths beneath Leyndell, where molten gold had hardened into sorrow, the faint sound of dripping water echoed, patient, persistent. The world was remembering how to live. The tarnished rose from their knees and looked to the horizon. The Erdtree loomed above them, vast and eternal, yet somehow gentler now. Its light was no longer the command of gods, but the breath of the earth itself. The golden leaves fell slowly, carried by wind, and when they touched the ground, they did not fade. They took root. Each leaf that landed grew into a small sprout, not golden, but green, the color of renewal, the color of things that learn and change and forgive. The tarnished watched, silent. Some smiled, others wept. They understood then what their long journey had been for. Not to restore the world as it was, but to remind it that even broken things can grow again. For the lands between was not dying, it was becoming. And as twilight fell, the wind carried a voice, not Marika's, not the greater wills, but something deeper, older, nameless. All that lives is grace. All that falls returns. The tarnished closed their eyes and listened. The sound was everywhere, in the roots, in the rivers, in the slow turning of the stars. It was not a song of gods, but of the land itself, singing softly to those who had remembered it. The lands between were no longer a battlefield, nor a prison, nor a relic. They were what they had always been, the quiet heart of the world, beating between shadow and light. And beneath the golden leaves, the earth breathed again. They once sat upon thrones of gold. Their voices carried through marble halls, their names sung as law, their will mistaken for truth. The Elden Lords, chosen by grace, crowned by the light of the Erdtree, guardians of an order that no longer remembered what it had been created to protect. They were not born to rule, they were made to preserve. Yet in preservation they became possessors, and in possession they fell. The first among them was Godfrey, the Golden Warrior. He had not sought glory, it had sought him. When Marika called him her consort, she bound his fate to eternity. Under his banner, the world was united, and his spear carved the dawn of the Golden Order. He was the first to kneel before the Erdtree and rise as its sword. His armies marched not for conquest, but for faith, to bring all beneath the golden light. And for a time, he believed that his wars had meaning, but victory is the enemy of purpose. When there were no more foes to strike, Godfrey's heart grew still. He felt the dull weight of peace settle upon him, and for the first time he questioned what lay beyond triumph. His strength, once revered, became idle. His warriors grew restless, their blades dull with silence. And in his emptiness, Marika saw reflection, the mirror of her own weariness. It was she who exiled him, though her voice trembled as she spoke. "You have no more worthy enemies," she told him. "So I send you to seek one in yourself." She stripped him of grace, and his golden aura dimmed. His crown cracked, his armor tarnished, his light turned to ash. He left the lands between as the first tarnished, bearing the curse that would one day become the world's redemption. He walked into the mist, a god made mortal, a lord made wanderer. The throne he left behind did not stay empty for long. Radagon rose to take it, the red-haired champion, the mirror of Marika, her consort and herself. He carried both her strength and her doubt, a living contradiction made flesh. Under his reign, the wars of faith continued, though their fire burned colder. He sought to unify, to heal, to prove that the golden law could still hold. But each victory drew him closer to the truth Marika had fled. That order without freedom was a gilded cage. He prayed before the Erdtree not for triumph, but for forgiveness. And when he vanished into its light, taking Marika with him, the world could not tell whether it was salvation or surrender. In the centuries that followed, others claimed the title of Elden Lord, but none bore its weight as it had been meant. The golden crown became a symbol not of duty, but of desire. Men and gods alike sought it, not to guard the world, but to own it. There was Godric the Grafted, who believed power could be stolen. His madness was not cruelty, but desperation, the longing of one who had been born in the shadow of greatness. He tore the limbs of heroes and grafted them to his own, building a body from the strength of others. His throne became a monument to envy, a twisted imitation of divinity. He called himself Lord, but the Erdtree did not recognize him. Its light never touched his crown. Then came Morgoth, veiled and unwanted. Born cursed, he ruled not for glory, but for faith. His horns marked him an omen, yet his heart burned with devotion. He stood guard over the throne when all others had forsaken it. Though the world despised him, he defended it still. His love for the Erdtree was unreciprocated, a god's devotion met with silence. When he died upon the steps of Leyndell, his final words were not of wrath, but of longing. "I have kept faith, even when the light turned from me." And far below, in the caverns drenched with blood, his brother Moog carved his own throne from defiance. Where grace had rejected him, he found a new god, formless, red, infinite. He ruled the forgotten with love twisted into hunger. In his eyes, the throne was not a seat of order, but of freedom. His ambition was not to preserve the world, but to remake it in his image, not golden, but crimson. Yet even his bloodied empire was born of yearning, the eternal ache to be seen by a light that had turned away. Other would-be lords rose and fell, each one grasping for the same fading flame. Some built kingdoms of ash. Others fell to dust before their crowns cooled. None understood that to sit upon the golden throne was to inherit not glory, but grief. The tarnished learned this truth in time. When they reached the capital and stood before the empty seat, they saw what the Elden Lords had never seen, that the throne was not meant to hold, it was meant to break. The gold that covered it had long since hardened into shell, hollow, shining and cold. The air around it smelled faintly of sap and sorrow. Beneath the gilded surface, roots twisted like veins, pulsing faintly with the heartbeat of the world. One among the tarnished placed their hand upon it, and for a moment the world went still. The golden metal felt warm, alive. Within its glow they saw not the faces of gods, but the countless reflections of those who had knelt before it. Kings and queens, warriors and dreamers, all believing they could mend the world by ruling it. The throne did not mock them, it mourned them. They understood then. To be an Elden Lord was not to command the Erdtree's light, but to bear its burden. To carry grace was to carry grief, to hold together what the gods had broken, knowing it could never be whole. And yet, for all their flaws, for all their pride and blindness, the lords had done what even gods could not. They had endured. They had kept the light alive, even if only as a flicker. They had kept the world turning, even if upon wounded legs. The Erdtree, vast and silent, seemed to bend slightly in the wind, its golden leaves whispering like the breath of time itself. It did not bless nor condemn. It remembered. For even ambition, when born from sorrow, becomes part of grace. The tarnished turned from the throne, their steps echoing through the empty hall. Behind them, the faint hum of the Erdtree followed, soft as a heartbeat, ancient as memory. The age of kings was over. The age of remembrance had begun. The Elden Lords, in their rise and fall, had not destroyed grace. They had revealed it, stripped of crowns and thrones, laid bare in the hearts of those who still dared to believe. And as the last light of day fell upon the golden city, the Erdtree's branches glowed faintly in the dusk, not as symbol, but as witness. For even the proudest gods, even the mightiest kings in the end, return to the same earth that bore them. And from that earth, the roots of grace grow again. They had once been called lords, crowned by light and anointed by grace, but time had stripped away their titles, leaving behind only the echoes of their ambition. The lands between remembered them not as rulers, but as scars. Their names were carved into stone, whispered by roots, carried on the wind like half-forgotten hymns. Each had reached toward eternity, each had fallen beneath its weight. In the golden city of Leyndell, the thrones stood empty now, their gilded surfaces dulled by dust. The great banners that once bore the sigils of divine kings hung tattered and grey. The air was heavy with the scent of old sap, the slow, patient decay of what had once been holy. Here, the ghosts of the Elden Lords lingered, bound not by curse but by longing. Their voices were faint as the rustle of leaves. They did not demand worship. They sought remembrance. The first voice belonged to Godfrey, the exile who had become legend. He had returned once more, though not as conqueror, nor as king. When he set foot again upon the soil of the lands between, the ground trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. His axe gleamed faintly beneath the dim light, and in his eyes burned neither rage nor glory, only understanding. The wars of gods had ended, the will of men had begun. He stood before the Erdtree and raised his head, the golden light catching in his hair. The branches above shimmered, and for a moment the world remembered what it had been like when gods and men shared the same breath. "I sought battle," he said quietly, "and found peace." Then he knelt, not to worship, but to rest. His armor cracked, his axe grew still, and his body dissolved into dust that the roots quietly carried downward. Even the Erdtree bowed to him that day, its leaves falling in slow spirals of gold. Radagon's echo was different. His was the silence of contradiction, the mirror of Marika's sorrow. Within the golden light, his image still lingered, neither whole nor broken. He had been both the hammer and the hand that struck it, the dreamer and the dream. He had tried to heal the wound of the shattering not through mercy, but through denial. His desire to unify had bound him to the cycle forever. The tarnished who stood beneath his fading statue felt not pity, but kinship. They, too, were creatures of contradiction, drawn by grace yet driven by defiance. In his stillness, they saw the same truth that haunted their own souls, that to serve the light is to risk being consumed by it. Other echoes flickered through the capital. Morgoth, the veiled king, still guarded the throne in memory. His spectral form wandered the shattered palace, eyes turned toward the Erdtree's glow. "I have kept faith," he whispered endlessly, as though the words themselves could keep the world from falling apart. He had loved the light so deeply that it burned him. His devotion was both his crown and his chain. Far below, where the roots twisted into darkness, Mohg's laughter could still be heard, soft, distant, and full of yearning. The empire of blood he had built beneath the world was long gone, its altars buried beneath centuries of earth. Yet his dream remained, a kingdom born not of law, but of desire. He had sought to free the world from the Erdtree's rule, yet in doing so had become its reflection, a god of freedom who bound himself to the hunger he could not control. Even the scarlet rot of Melania lingered in the air, though her body had turned to petals long ago. The fields she had once burned now bloomed crimson, the ground drinking her memory as though it were wine. The tarnished who passed through her resting place spoke softly, feeling her presence in the wind, not wrath, not sorrow, but love that refused to die. Her battle had not been for conquest, but for devotion, and in that devotion she had become eternal. The Erdtree remembered them all, its light shimmered faintly each dusk, falling upon the empty thrones. Where once the crowns of gods had rested, now only dust remained. But within that dust, something new stirred, the faint glimmer of growth. Roots broke through the marble floors, sprouting small green shoots that shimmered faintly in the fading light. The golden age had ended, the age of renewal had begun. The tarnished stood before the empty throne and understood what the lords had not, that no one could own grace. It was not a crown to be claimed, but a current to be carried. Those who tried to contain it were consumed. Those who released it were remembered. They left the capital and walked into the world again. The Erdtree's light followed them, not as command, but as companion. They saw its reflection in every pool of water, every glint of dew, every breath of wind. Grace had scattered, not vanished. It had woven itself into the land, into the hearts of those who had survived the long silence. Across the lands between, the remnants of the Lord's ambition were being reclaimed by time. The castles of Godric crumbled into the roots of the Erdtree. The blood altars of Moog turned to black stone and split, releasing the scent of iron into the wind. The red fields of Melania bloomed anew, the rot turning to soil rich with life. Even the ashes of Morgoth's city glowed faintly at night, as if touched by unseen fire. The world was not healed, but it was changing. The Erdtree's light no longer shone from above, it rose from below. Its glow now came from the ground, from the moss that clung to ruins, from the rivers that flowed through forgotten valleys, from the fireflies that danced at dusk. Grace was no longer divine. It was alive. The echoes of the old lords faded, but their lessons remained. Ambition had built the world, and ambition had broken it. Yet in the wreckage of that pride, something purer endured will. The will to rise, to move, to begin again. One night, as the tarnished camped upon a hill overlooking the golden city, the sky turned soft with rain. The drops fell golden, glowing briefly before sinking into the soil. The tarnished looked up, and for a moment they saw the Erdtree's branches stretch not downward, but upward, not as prison, but as path. And in that shimmering rain they understood. The age of gods was not gone. It had simply changed shape. The divine no longer ruled from thrones of gold. It lived now in smaller things, in every breath, in every spark, in every choice. The gods had sought eternity and found only silence. But mortals, fragile and forgotten, had found what eternity could not hold. Meaning, when dawn broke, the world seemed lighter. The golden glow of the Erdtree was pale now, soft as dawn. Its great branches still reached across the sky, but they no longer cast shadow, they cast warmth. The wind moved gently through the leaves, and the sound that came from them was not hymn nor lament. It was laughter, faint, distant, like the echo of a dream finally at peace. For though the Elden Lords had fallen, their story had not been in vain. The world they left behind was no longer ruled by crowns or gods, but by remembrance, by the quiet, enduring truth that even in ruin, life continues. And far beneath the soil, where roots met stone and light met dark, the world whispered the same words it had spoken since the first dawn. All who reach for the divine must learn to return to the earth. The thrones of the Elden Lords crumbled. The Erdtree bloomed anew. And grace, scattered and free, began again its endless song. The world no longer burned with the golden fire of gods, yet it did not fall to darkness. It lingered in the quiet between, where endings hum softly into beginnings, and even ruin finds rhythm. This was the age that never ends, born not from prophecy or divine decree, but from the steady breathing of a world that had learned to endure itself. The Erdtree no longer ruled as it once had. Its light had dimmed, but not died. It glowed now like memory, soft, living, imperfect. Its roots no longer drank the blood of gods, but the rain of the mortal earth. Its branches swayed not to command, but to listen. From its trunk, golden sap flowed like tears, each drop carrying a reflection of what had been the flames of war, the songs of devotion, the whispers of grace. Yet those reflections no longer demanded worship. They drifted into the rivers, joining the long current of time. The tarnished who had once sought the throne now wandered freely, their blades sheathed, their eyes quiet. They did not call themselves lords nor saviors. They were keepers of stories, of silence, of the fragile peace that had settled over the lands between like a mist. They had walked through flame, rot, and sorrow, and they understood now that no victory was eternal, no defeat complete. And yet the world turned still. From the north, fire began to rise again. Not the holy flame of the Erdtree, but something older, raw, red, alive. Deep beneath the mountains, the old furnaces of the giants roared awake. Their fire had once been bound by the gods, sealed to preserve the age of gold. Now it breathed freely once more, stretching its light into the cold heavens. The snow upon the peaks melted into rivers that glowed faintly at night. The land drank deeply of this warmth, as though remembering the comfort of imperfection. In the east, the scarlet fields of Caelid shimmered with new life. The rot that had once devoured the land now lay dormant, coiled like a sleeping serpent beneath the soil. From its decay sprouted flowers, pale, fragile, but alive. They glowed faintly in the dark, each petal carrying a trace of Melenia's will. Her war was over, yet her essence remained not as curse but as seed. The rot had not died, it had changed. It had learned to grow without devouring. And far to the west, beneath the eternal moon of Liurnia, light fell upon still waters. The stars, once dimmed by the Erdtree's gold, now shone freely again. Their reflection danced across the lakes, and the ruins of the academy glimmered faintly with blue flame. Sorcerers who remained there spoke of new constellations, not born of fate, but of choice. They named this new era the Weaving, for the heavens and earth had begun to interlace once more. The people who lived in this age, men, women, and the lingering children of divinity, did not kneel before idols. They planted gardens in the shadows of old statues. They built homes beside the roots of forgotten temples. They sang songs not to gods, but to the wind, and the wind answered. Their prayers were not of supplication, but of gratitude to the soil, to the rivers, to the quiet persistence of the sun. And in the depths of the Erdtree's shadow, the voice of Marika still lingered, faint as the echo of a dream. She no longer spoke to command, but to comfort. "I broke the circle," she whispered through the leaves, "not to end it, but to let it breathe." Her words drifted into the hearts of those who listened, carried not by light, but by stillness. Yet even as peace settled, the cycle turned, for the world was not made for stillness. Grace, like fire, could never remain idle. It yearned always to move, to seek, to burn, to bloom. And so, as centuries passed, the fires grew warmer, the stars brighter, the roots deeper. New gods began to stir. They were not born from the heavens, nor shaped by will from beyond. They rose from the earth itself, from the dreams of mortals, from the echoes of those who had once been divine. Some were kind, born of love and patience. Others burned with pride, longing to restore the old hierarchies, yet none were eternal. They rose and fell like waves, each leaving the land a little richer, a little wiser. One god took form beneath the sea of Liurnia, a being of reflection and memory. It whispered to the waves, teaching the people to look not to the sky for answers, but into the depths. "The surface blinds." It murmured, but the still water remembers. Those who listened learned the art of patience, the magic of silence. Another rose from the scarlet soil of Caelid, its body woven from roots and flowers. It taught that rot and life were one, that decay was not punishment but renewal. Its worshippers did not build temples, they built gardens over the graves of the fallen. In the far north, a new fire god awoke within the ashes of the giants, not to consume, but to warm. His flame danced gently across the tundra, melting the snow into golden streams. Travelers said that when they sat by his light, they could hear the laughter of those they had lost. And still, the Erdtree stood, its branches glimmering faintly beneath the stars. It no longer dominated the horizon, for the world around it had grown vast enough to match its light. It had become what it was always meant to be, a witness, not a ruler. Its leaves fell each season and grew again, carrying with them the scent of memory. Beneath its roots, the dreams of every age coiled together, weaving the endless tapestry of existence. The tarnished who remained lived long lives and faded gently, their names merging into the soil like seeds. No one remembered who among them had once claimed the title of Elden Lord. Perhaps none had. Perhaps the throne had remained empty, as it was always meant to. For the true throne of the world was not gold nor stone. It was the horizon itself, infinite, shifting, alive. In time, the people forgot the wars of gods. They forgot the names of Marika, of Radagon, of the demigods who had bled the sky. But they did not forget grace. They saw it each morning when the sun broke through the mist, when the rivers shimmered beneath moonlight, when the wind whispered through the trees. Grace was no longer something to seek. It was something to live. And so the world entered a peace that was not stillness but motion, a peace that breathed, changed, and dreamed. Ages rose and fell, fires burned and dimmed, yet the song continued, unbroken, for no age truly ends. Each one becomes the soil for the next. And in the quiet between them, between fire and frost, between death and dawn, the world finds itself again. The age that never ends was not a triumph. It was a heartbeat. And as long as it beat, the lands between remained alive, not through divinity, but through memory, through love, through the endless will to begin again. The stars were the first to return. They came not as prophecy, nor as gods reborn, but as quiet reminders, countless lights scattered across a sky that had long forgotten its own reflection. For ages, the heavens had been dimmed by the gold of the Erdtree, their song drowned by the endless hum of grace. But now, in this new twilight of the world, they sang again. The night glowed not with judgment, but with freedom. The people looked up and saw what their ancestors had never truly known, the cosmos breathing. Constellations shimmered, pulsing like the veins of the sky. The scholars of Liurnia called it the reawakening, but the old storytellers simply said that the stars were dreaming once more. And in their dreams, new fates were born, not written by divine law, but by the will of those who walked beneath them. Under these starlit skies, the lands between changed again. The balance that had long eluded gods and mortals alike began to take form. From the remnants of grace, from the ashes of fire, from the decay of rot, life began its patient weaving. In the north, where the giants' forges had once burned eternal, their flame lived on, gentler now, more patient. It no longer sought to consume, only to illuminate. Wanderers carried its embers in lanterns across the frozen plains, keeping its warmth alive as they built new homes within the snow. Around their fires, they told stories of the old gods, not in reverence, but in remembrance. The children who listened no longer feared the names of Marika, Radagon, or Melania. They spoke them like the wind speaks the names of fallen leaves. In the south, where the rot had once devoured all, the land began to bloom with strange beauty. The scarlet soil gave rise to blossoms that shone faintly at dusk, their petals whispering as they opened. These flowers fed not on death, but on memory. Those who knelt among them swore they could hear the faint heartbeat of the goddess who had once fought alone in that crimson wilderness. The people called her the Blooming Blade, and though no temple bore her name, every field that flowered was her altar. And far above, the moon shone fuller than it ever had. Its reflection spilled across the lakes of Liurnia, turning the waters into liquid glass. The sorcerers who had once studied the arcane arts now sought understanding, instead of power. They had learned that the moon's magic was not dominion but dialogue, an invitation to look inward. They taught that light and shadow were not enemies but partners in an eternal dance. One reveals what the other hides, they said, and together they make truth. Through these cycles, fire, rot, and moonlight, the world learned to breathe again. The tarnished, those who had once walked the roads of ruin, were now legends told around these new fires. Some said they had vanished into the roots of the Erdtree, becoming part of its living memory. Others believed they still wandered, unseen, guiding travelers who lost their way. Whatever the truth, their legacy endured not as rulers but as reminders that the divine is not found above, but within the persistence to rise after every fall. And though centuries passed, the Erdtree still stood. Its branches were thinner now, its gold dimmer, but it lived. The tree no longer ruled the sky, it shared it. The stars wove through its canopy, their light catching in the leaves like jewels scattered through shadow. Sometimes, on still nights, travelers said they saw the tree breathe, not the tremor of wind, but the slow, rhythmic pulse of something vast and content. From its roots flowed rivers of golden sap, mingling with soil and stone. These streams spread across the lands between, nourishing fields and forests alike. Those who drank from them did not gain immortality, they gained memory. Dreams filled with visions of the past and future intertwined. In those dreams, they saw the first dawn, the first flame, the first song of creation, and always in the distance, the faint whisper of Marika's voice. You were never meant to serve eternity, you were meant to continue it. Yet even in peace, the cycle stirred. Fire grew restless, yearning for motion. Rot deepened, hungering for change. The moon waxed and waned, its reflection shifting. The balance trembled, not from discord, but from the simple truth that no harmony can stand still. The age that never ends was not an age of stillness, but of gentle renewal, one turning endlessly into another. New empires rose, born from memory rather than ambition. They did not claim divinity, they cultivated it. The people learned that to create was to honor the gods who had fallen, and to let go was to surpass them. Pain became wisdom, sorrow became song. Even death was no longer a wound but a return. In time, the storytellers began to speak of the three currents, fire, rot, and moonlight, as the new faces of grace. They were not worshipped, but understood. Each represented the eternal truth of the world, that everything burns, decays, and reflects, only to begin again. Fire became the symbol of will, the spark that drives all things to act, to love, to defy. Rot became the symbol of transformation, the decay that makes way for new life. And moonlight became the symbol of awareness, the mirror that reminds the world of itself. Together, they formed a cycle that could never break, only change shape. The gods of old had sought eternity through stillness, but eternity, the people learned, was movement, the quiet spinning of the world through shadow and flame, and so the lands between lived on. At dawn, the fires of the north glowed like the heart of the world. At noon, the blossoms of the south shimmered beneath gentle rain. At night, the moon spilled her silver across the waters, and the stars hummed their endless hymn. The Erdtree watched it all, no longer the master of the world, but its memory. Its roots stretched deep, touching every flame, every flower, every ripple of light. Its leaves fell and grew again with the turning of each age, golden at birth, green at death. It had become not the symbol of order, but of endurance, the promise that the world would never again be still. And in the heart of the tree, deep within the golden sap, a single light flickered. It was small, fragile, the echo of a long-forgotten name. It might have been grace. It might have been the soul of a goddess. Or it might have been something simpler, the will of life itself, refusing to fade. The world had begun again. The age that never ends was not peace without sorrow, nor creation without ruin. It was the truth that all things, gods, mortals, and stars, must fall, must change, must rise. And within that endless motion, Grace continued to hum not as command, but as lullaby. The wind carried its whisper across the sleeping fields, through forests and lakes, through fire and moonlight, through every heart that still dared to dream. All that begins must end, and all that ends must begin again. The stars shimmered above the Erdtree's branches, and the world at last slept in its own gentle eternity. It began, as all great returns do, not with thunder, but with silence. The Erdtree stood beneath a twilight sky, its branches black against the stars, its gold dimmed to the color of old memory. The world had turned through ages of fire and moonlight, through decay and bloom, and though the land had healed, it had also forgotten. Grace, that ancient, golden hum that once bound God and earth, had become a legend told to children, a shimmer spoken of in stories whispered beside hearths. But deep beneath the roots, where light and soil intertwined, something stirred. At first it was only a pulse, faint, irregular, like the slow heartbeat of a world half dreaming. The roots of the Erdtree trembled as though exhaling after 1,000 years. Sap flowed again, sluggish and golden, threading through the stone veins of the world. It rose not from heaven, but from below, from the wounds of the land, from the ashes of battles long ended, from the bones of those who had lived and died beneath its shadow. Grace was returning, not as the voice of gods, but as the breath of the earth itself. Across the lands between, the signs were subtle. A soft glow in the rain, the brief shimmer of gold upon the wings of a bird, the faint sound of distant bells beneath the wind. The people did not recognize it at first. They only felt lighter, as though the air itself remembered how to carry warmth. In the meadows of Limgrave, wildflowers began to turn gold at their edges. Travelers who passed by swore they heard faint hymns in the rustling of the grass. Old stones glowed at dusk, their carved runes flickering with meaning long lost to history. Children born in that age had eyes that reflected light, even in darkness. They called it the blessing of the ground, not knowing that it was the same grace that had once poured from the Erdtree's boughs like rain. In Liurnia, the waters deepened in color. The moonlight that touched their surface no longer shimmered cold and silver, but with a faint warmth beneath. The scholars who watched the lakes each night began to see strange reflections, glimpses of other places, other times. "The world is remembering itself," one said. "It is dreaming of what it once was." In Caelid, where rot had ruled for centuries, the change came as a sigh. The crimson earth softened. The blossoms of Melenia's curse closed their petals and turned white. A fragrance filled the air, sweet, sorrowful, ancient. The people did not trust it at first, but when the first new trees sprouted from the scarlet ground, they understood. The rot was not ending. It was becoming. And far in the north, among the mountains of flame, the forges of the giants burned again. But this fire was not for war. It was soft and steady, casting golden light upon the snow. The blacksmiths said the flame no longer consumed, it created. Each spark that leapt from their anvils lingered in the air like a firefly before drifting away into the wind. The tarnished, those who had once walked beneath the Erdtree's wrath and mercy, were long gone, yet their memory lingered. Their weapons were found in the roots of trees, their armor turned to earth, their names whispered only by rivers. They had not ascended to the heavens, nor vanished into myth. They had become part of the world they once sought to save. One night, beneath a sky alive with stars, a young woman named Allren stood before the Erdtree's hollow trunk. She was a scholar's daughter, her hair dusted with ash and her hands calloused from tending to the earth. She had heard the stories of the gods, how they had burned, how they had broken, how they had fallen into silence. But she did not come to pray. She came to listen. The wind moved through the hollow like a breath. The gold within the bark shimmered faintly. Allren pressed her ear to the tree's surface, and in that stillness she heard it, a faint hum, distant and low, like a song sung beneath the soil. It was not the voice of a god. It was the sound of the world's heart, beating again. Grace had returned, not as a crown, not as a command, but as remembrance, a quiet light that moved through the veins of the world and into the hearts of those who lived upon it. It no longer chose kings or heroes. It no longer divided faith from doubt. It simply was. The people began to see it everywhere, in the laughter of their children, in the way rain turned to mist upon their skin, in the warmth of a stranger's fire. It was not the blinding radiance of old, but something humbler, like dawn seen through tears. Grace had shed its perfection. It had become human. And yet, even in its gentleness, it carried the memory of eternity. Those who felt it began to dream of the past, not in visions of power or prophecy, but in the quiet echoes of what once was. In their sleep, they saw Marika standing beneath the Erdtree, her face serene, her crown gone. They saw Radagon beside her, no longer a god of war, but a man at peace. They saw Melania, kneeling among the white flowers of Kaled, smiling as the wind brushed her hair. They saw the tarnished walking beneath the stars, unburdened, their weapons laid to rest. And through it all, they heard a single voice, calm, eternal, loving. "You see now," it said. "The light was never mine to give. It was yours to remember." The people woke from these dreams changed. They no longer built temples to the gods, nor monuments to their wars. Instead, they planted trees, not of gold, but of green. They wove the soil with roots and the air with songs. The Erdtree, towering above them, seemed to listen, its ancient boughs swaying to the rhythm of their new prayers, prayers not spoken, but lived. For grace had never truly left. It had only learned to return differently, not as a pillar of power, but as the quiet presence in all living things. It flowed through water, through wind, through blood. It whispered through every breath, reminding the world of what it had always known but forgotten, that divinity and life were never separate. One evening, as the sun sank into the horizon, the Erdtree shone again. Its leaves, long faded, burst into gold, not the blinding gold of domination, but the gentle gold of memory. The entire sky glowed with it, and the rivers caught its reflection, turning the world into a mirror of light. The people gathered beneath it, their faces bathed in the soft radiance. They did not kneel. They simply stood, eyes wide, hearts still. For they understood what the gods had not, that grace was not to be worshipped, but to be shared. And in that moment the Erdtree sighed. A single leaf, bright as dawn, drifted down and landed upon Allren's open hand. It pulsed once, warm as breath, before turning to light and vanishing into her skin. The return of grace was complete. The world was whole, not because it was unbroken, but because it had learned to live with its scars. The Erdtree no longer ruled the heavens, it rooted itself in the earth. Its light was no longer divine, but familiar, a reflection of every soul that had ever walked beneath it. And somewhere in that quiet glow, among the whispering leaves and the endless hum of life, a voice, ancient, weary, kind, spoke once more. The ring was never meant to bind. It was meant to remind. Then the wind rose, scattering the golden petals into the air, and the world shimmered like dawn breaking across eternity. The age of gods had ended. The age of grace had begun anew, not as light descending from the sky, but as love rising from the soil. And beneath that eternal tree, the world, for the first time, truly rested. It came quietly, as all endings do. There were no storms, no shattering of the sky, no final roar from the gods who once claimed the heavens. Only stillness, vast and tender, falling over the lands between like a veil. The Erdtree glowed faintly at the heart of the world, its golden light softened to the hue of dawn. It no longer reached for the stars. It bent toward the earth, its roots cradling the soil like the arms of an old and weary mother. The return of grace had not been a moment, but a slow unfolding, a breath drawn across centuries. Now that breath had deepened into rest. The world, for the first time, was neither ruled nor watched. It simply was. The people lived as if the divine had never left, and in truth it never had. They no longer sought grace in the heavens. They found it in the rhythm of rain upon stone, in the laughter that echoed through open windows, in the golden glow that lingered at the edge of twilight. Each life, no matter how brief, was its own kind of prayer, a soft spark within the infinite heartbeat of the world, and the world remembered them. The lands between had changed in ways no god could have imagined. Where once there were borders, now there were paths. Where once there were temples, now there were gardens. The rivers ran wide and gentle, winding through valleys filled with the green of renewal. Great beasts roamed freely, no longer symbols of wrath or prophecy, but of balance. The stars reflected upon the lakes, as if bending down to kiss the earth that had long suffered beneath their gaze. The Erdtree's leaves, once golden and divine, now grew in shades of green and amber, their glow faint, like the memory of light rather than light itself. Each leaf that fell carried a whisper, not of command, but of comfort. All things end, it seemed to say, and all things return. Among the roots of that great tree, where the soil was thick with time, stood a single shrine, unmarked, unnamed, built not for worship but for remembrance. It was said to have been raised by a lone traveler, one of the last who still called themselves Tarnished. They had walked the breadth of the lands between until their steps grew too heavy, and here they had stopped. They placed upon the altar a single rusted blade, its edge dulled by centuries, its handle worn smooth by countless hands. It was not a weapon anymore. It was memory. Upon it were carved words so faint they could barely be seen, to rise again when the world has forgotten. No one knew the traveler's name. Some said they had once been a lord. Others whispered that they were only a wanderer who had carried the will of grace long after gods had turned to dust. But the shrine endured. Those who passed it felt a quiet warmth, as though the tree itself bowed its branches in gentle blessing. And in the villages nearby, life continued in peace. Children played in the roots of the Erdtree, their laughter carrying into the branches like birdsong. Farmers spoke of the seasons not in fear, but in gratitude. Scholars recorded not the wars of gods, but the dreams of men. Poets wrote of the stars and the soil in the same breath, for they understood now that both were made of the same light. As generations passed, the names of the gods grew softer. Marika became a story, the woman who broke eternity so the world might breathe. Radagon became the red flame that warmed the cold. Melenia became the flower that bloomed through death. Even the Erdtree itself became legend, called by many names. The mother root, the last light, the tree of remembrance. But though names faded, their essence remained. For grace had woven itself into every living thing. It shone in the eyes of lovers meeting at dusk, in the small flame of a candle burning through the night, in the tears shed for both sorrow and joy. It was no longer something to chase. It had become something to be. And yet, deep beneath the tree, beneath the roots and the rivers and the bones of the world, something still glowed. It was a small, steady light, pulsing in rhythm with the earth. Some said it was the heart of grace itself, slumbering. Others believed it was the memory of the first flame, still burning, waiting. But perhaps it was neither. Perhaps it was simply the echo of all that had ever lived, all that had ever loved, refusing to fade into silence. On nights when the moon hung full and heavy, travelers who slept near the Erdtree would dream. They would see a vast plain of gold, stretching into forever. In its center stood a woman in white, her hair braided with starlight, her eyes filled with peace. She would say nothing, but her gaze would linger, soft, knowing, eternal. When the dreamers woke, they carried with them a single golden leaf pressed against their palms. It would crumble into dust by morning, leaving behind only warmth. The scholars came to call these dreams echoes of grace. But among the people, they were simply called blessings, reminders that the world was still awake, still remembering. And as the centuries drifted into one another, the cycle continued. The fires burned low, the rivers rose and fell, the stars wandered through the sky. Kingdoms grew and faded, leaving behind ruins that flowers would one day reclaim. The Erdtree's light dimmed further still, yet even in its fading, it remained beautiful. For now it was not the light of dominion, but of memory, a light that belonged to all things. In time, even the great tree began to bend. Its trunk hollowed, its crown thinned. But its roots had spread across the entire world, binding mountains to oceans, deserts to forests. When its last golden leaf fell, it did not vanish. It turned to ash, then to soil, then to seed. From that seed, countless smaller trees grew, not golden, not divine, but living. And through them, grace continued. The people looked upon these new trees and saw in their leaves the reflection of the old, the way light caught upon them, the way they swayed in the wind. They called them the children of the Erdtree, and beneath their shade, life flourished. And somewhere beneath one such tree, a young child once asked their mother, "Who made the world?" The mother smiled and said, "The world made itself. We only remembered how to live in it." That night, the wind passed through the leaves, carrying with it a sound like distant laughter, soft and kind. It might have been the echo of the gods, or perhaps it was the voice of the world itself, singing its endless lullaby. As the stars wheeled overhead and the roots whispered beneath, the song of grace filled the air one last time, not as prophecy, not as power, but as peace. All things fall, all things rise. All light fades, all light returns. The world endures. The dream continues. The Erdtree's last glow dimmed, leaving behind only the shimmer of moonlight upon the rivers. The air grew still. The night was deep, and in that silence, perfect, whole, infinite, the world exhaled. The age of grace had ended, but grace itself, eternal and quiet, lived on, not in gods, not in rings, but in every heart that learned at last to shine without needing to be divine. The world had turned many times since the ring first broke. Ages had risen and fallen like the tide, some bright with fire, others dim with shadow. Gods had reigned and perished, their names carved into the veins of the earth, then swallowed by it. The Erdtree had grown and withered, and yet it remained not as an idol, but as a witness. It had watched the long story of its own creation unfold and close again, like a golden eye blinking slowly against the light of eternity. Now the air was still. The age of gods had ended. The age of grace had ended, but the world endured. The lands between no longer bore the burden of worship or war. The rivers had forgotten the taste of blood. The roots of the Erdtree no longer pulsed with divine command, only with the rhythm of life. The light that once poured down from the heavens now rose gently from the soil, carried by every living thing that called the earth home. The people of this final age did not speak the names of the old gods, yet they carried their lessons in their hearts. They had learned that power fades, but kindness does not. That eternity, when chained, becomes a prison, but when shared, becomes a garden. They built no temples. They planted trees. They forged no thrones. They gathered around fires, telling stories of the past not to worship, but to remember. And always, the wind carried the same song, faint, patient, eternal. The storytellers spoke of how the Erdtree had once been the heart of heaven, born from the will of the divine. They spoke of Marika, who shattered perfection to give the world imperfection, and through it, meaning. They spoke of her children, who fought for fragments of her dream, never realizing they were only reflections of her sorrow. They spoke of the tarnished who rose from dust, walked through ruin, and remembered what the gods had forgotten, that grace is not something to be given, but something to be found. And when they spoke of the end, they spoke softly, for there was no true ending, only return. The Erdtree's gold had long since faded to green. Its bark was rough with age, its roots tangled through the bones of 1,000 civilizations. Yet in its shadow, life thrived. Birds nested in its hollows, vines wrapped gently around its trunk. The air beneath its branches was cool and calm, filled with the hum of insects, the whisper of wind, the heartbeat of the world. It was said that, on certain nights, when the stars were bright and the leaves shimmered silver, you could hear voices within the rustle, old, gentle voices, not commanding, not divine. They did not speak words. They sang. Their song was older than the gods, older than fire, older even than the earth. It was the sound of grace, not as light, but as remembrance. I was the ring that bound the world, it whispered, and I am the soil that grew from its breaking. I was the flame that burned the sky. And I am the warmth that remains when the ashes fall. I was the God that shaped all things. And I am the silence that lets them be. In that silence, the stars watched. They had seen this story countless times, the rise of order, the fall into ruin, the slow return of peace. Yet even they shimmered with wonder, for this time, the cycle felt different. This time, the world had not been reborn in fire or law, but in love, and so the dream continued. Somewhere, a child ran laughing through the fields, her feet kicking up petals that glowed faintly in the dusk. Somewhere, a poet wrote by candlelight, his words soft as prayer. Somewhere, the wind brushed against the Erdtree's roots, carrying whispers across the sleeping world. The gods were gone, but their light had never left. It had simply changed hands. In the heart of the Erdtree, buried deep within the sap and soil, the last fragment of the Elden Ring rested, not shining, but pulsing faintly like the heartbeat of a slumbering world. It did not command. It did not wait. It only existed, content in its quiet purpose. For the ring had never been a weapon, nor a crown. It had been a reflection, a mirror through which all things might remember their connection to each other. Above it, the branches swayed, golden dust falling like rain. It sparkled for a moment before settling into the ground, where new roots would one day grow. And when the final light faded, when even memory itself grew soft around the edges, the world whispered its last truth, that divinity was never the power to rule. It was the courage to let go. The lands between slept, blanketed in grace, not a kingdom of gods, but a home for all that had ever been and all that would ever be again. The cycle was whole, the dream unbroken, and beneath the eternal tree, the world at last was still. Even when the divine circle shatters, its fragments still remember the light, for every ruin is only the beginning of grace, waiting to bloom again.